Hi, my name is Bella McIntyre, and this is my final journal portfolio presentation for British Literature with Dr. Curley. So, throughout this semester, we studied British literature from the Romantic period all the way up to the modern and postmodern um, periods in literature, and we looked at poetry, we looked at novels, plays, essays, but we mainly focused on the historical and the cultural context behind these works. So, in this presentation, I'm going to talk about my journal portfolio, my notes, and my active reading process, and then also the major themes for my activities and my assignments. Um, One thing that really stood out to me throughout this semester is the fact that literature it's not just entertainment. It also has a lot of cultural background. It went through different issues like identity or class or like gender and stuff like that. And even though many of these works were written like hundreds of years ago, a lot of them are still used today or thought of today. So that's what we're going to be going through in this presentation. So, with the course overview, one of the biggest parts was the journal portfolio system. So instead of just taking tests or writing just one paper, we were consistently recording notes and reflections in one of the three documents. We had a notes document, activities document, and an assignments document. In the notes is obviously it's where we took notes in our from our lectures. So either from whenever you were in class or say you missed class, you would do it in the lecture recordings. Um, your readings. So we would have assigned readings every single week, and you would take notes on those readings. Um, on the prezzies, which he would post, I believe it was like every module, he would post a prezzy, sorry, and we would just take notes on that as well. Um, and then if you had any other like notes from like your activities or your assignments, you would also put in there. We also had our assignments page, which that was from. We had an assignment around. We didn't have too many assignments in this class, but those were like our bigger-ish ones. So that was like our midterm paper was in there, our final paper was in there, stuff like that. And then we also had our activities page, which we had an activity for every single week, and usually every time it was related to something with our book or with our not our book but our piece that we were reading, one of the pieces we were reading, whether it was he chose it and you had to do it on that, or you could pick one and then you just did something specific with it. Um, at first the notes was I felt like it was really repetitive, but then, and I was kind of like just wondering, like, not just why we were doing it, but like in such a concentrated way why we were doing it. But then I realized that it really was helpful. Like, it helped me engage with the material, and it really helped me like understand what we were doing. Like, there were certain parts where if I just listened to it in class, I probably wouldn't have understood it. Um, Another main thing was the active reading. So not just with the note taking that we did in our notes document, but we would also like do class discussions in there. Like, we would pick a piece and then we would have to actively ask questions. And that was something that helped me realize that there were a lot of reoccurring themes throughout this semester. So like through the whole different time periods, like even though we were in the romantic literature period, there were certain texts that were very similar to like the human struggles of like power and fear and stuff in the modernist literature era. So I felt that the active note taking and the notes pages that we did, I felt like that really helped with connecting all of it. Next is I'm going to talk about is the romanticism and nature movement. So before class, I knew a lot about the romantic literature kind of era and period because of my history teacher. Um, she taught all my history classes, and she absolutely loves this period in this area. So we talked about it a lot. Um, I will say I knew a lot about it, but when it came to literature specifically, I mainly thought of it as like love and emotions. But it is a lot broader than that. Obviously, it's not just on love and emotions, also on like memories, imagination, and nature. So writers like William Wordsworth, that I have on the screen, he believed that nature could emotionally and spiritually affect people, which which that's how he connected it to the romanticism. And then there was one activity that we did that was it was to the I wandered it was the I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by him. And in my reflection, I talked about how the poem it mainly just seemed simple and it was describing daffodils by a lake, but the main meaning was talking about memory and emotional healing. Um, in the piece, the speaker is remembering the daffodils later whenever he's alone, like later in life when he's alone, and the memory brings him comfort and happiness. I connected this idea to real life because there are certain moments in nature that that can stay in people's memories for years and still affect their emotions later. Like for me, when it comes to nature, I definitely think of whenever I see roses, I think of several people in my family because like in my name, like my name's Bella Rose. Rose is kind of a family name. A lot of people in my family have that name, and it's also just a I don't know. Almost every one of my relatives has some type of rose in their house, so that's how it connects to memories with me. Um, we also connect. I also connected it to social media because so it took a more modern take because like I said, nature tends to be one of those things where people use it to have memories, and people may constantly post like whether it's flowers or beaches or like these peaceful landscapes. And for some people, it may just be because it looks nice, but for some people, it may reflect like an escape. Like, yeah, you're in this certain place, but then you go to a beach and you're at the beach and you feel like you're escaping the place you were just at. Um, and this section really helped me because the romantic period is not just about describing the scenery, it's about exploring how humans emotionally like interact and how we can use the world around us to interact. Um Next is social injustice and power. For example, so with social systems and inequality, we read Mary Robinson's January 1795. So this poem mainly focuses on poverty and suffering during the harsh winter, while wealthy people and political leaders were very comfortable and remained untouched, basically. Um, so Mary, she uses these vivid imagery to describe the hunger and weakness among the poor people or less fortunate people. What really stood out to me was how relevant the poem feels today. So even though it was written a long, long time ago, we still debate over issues involving the economic inequality, rising of costs of living, especially with like nowadays, especially with gas, medical welfare, and whether the government is truly there to help us or if they're just trying to benefit themselves. We also studied Mary Wollstonecraft's A Benediction of the Rights of Women. So we did an activity on this, and basically, I discussed how Mary she would argue that women were more treated as like objects rather than individuals. She would talk about how the society would train the women to focus only on their appearance and their like obedience with their husband, basically instead of them being independent, them doing stuff on their own, them learning stuff on their own, like they couldn't go to school. Um, and I can definitely connect this to modern day because, like, yes, it's definitely it's nowhere near as bad as it was before because, you know, as you can see here, I'm by myself. I don't have to have a husband with me. I can go to school freely. But we definitely have those in beauty and those social culture and standards because we're heavily judged on our appearance and presentation still. But that is something I feel that we're never really going to get out of. And one other text when it comes to this was the Elizabeth Barrett Browning's The Cry of the Children. So this is mainly towards child labor and industrial exploitation. Um, this was I mainly connected this to the my modern approach was the cocoa farms in West Africa. So though the setting and time period were different, the core issues the same. So the workers are suffering while the powerful systems are profiting off of their labor. And I feel that this part of the course really showed me that literature not just is there for entertainment, but it can be used for protest and activism. Next part would definitely be, our major part would be the midterm project. So for my midterm project, I focus on analyzing literature through interpretation instead of like a simple summary. I definitely learned how important literary arguments are. So because of course, like I knew that literature you can identify through themes and symbols, but um, with this, we actually had to build an argument and had to look and explain through patterns in text. I will definitely I could go through it a lot more. Like I could really go like really in depth here, but I just lost my time and I don't know what time. But I definitely learned with this analysis is that there's not just one correct answer. There can be a lot of different answers and a lot of different interpretations that can exist at one time. Though some can be more in depth than others, there is definitely not just one answer when it comes to literature. Next would definitely be identity and performance. So that was something that was repeatedly a theme that we found in this. Oh, sorry, that we found in this semester. Um, so like one of them would be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. So that was by Robert Louis Stevenson. He explores the duality of human nature. So Jekyll, which is basically him, the human, he tries to separate the good and evil parts of himself, but which would be Hyde. The good would be himself, Dr. Jekyll, and Mr. Hyde would be the evil. But he ends up losing control over Mr. Hyde completely. But what really interested me was again the modern take on this. Like I can I can connect this to social media because using specifically the Dr. Jekyll Mr. Hyde like analogy with this is everyone's Dr. Jekyll is how you see them on social media, I fear. Or it could be the complete opposite. How you see them in public is their Dr. Jekyll. Their Mr. Hyde could really just be how they are in public or how they are on social media. Like there are plenty of celebrities where their Dr. Jekyll is them on social media, but then their Mr. Hyde, their real self, their evil self, is them in person. Like they are completely two different people when it comes to in person. We also studied Oscar Wilde's The Importance of Being Earnest, which focuses heavily on the performance and fake identities, like what I was just saying. So you have these two characters, Jack and Algernon, I believe that's how you say it. So they're constantly, throughout the whole story, they're constantly lying about themselves. And they're basically trying to gain this social advantage by lying about everything about themselves. But one thing I found interesting was how Oscar Wilde, he treated their identity almost like a performance. Like it was literally like a play. And it was really interesting and really entertaining because they were lying constantly, but it really showed that like a lot of people care more about their reputation and tend to want to put on more of a play or more of a performance instead of just being themselves. I did find that really, really cool and also really just it just opens another perspective of how we see ourselves. Um and next would be Heart of Darkness and Imperialism. So that was definitely one of the most challenging texts by Joseph Conrad. It talks about isolation, imperialism, obviously colonialism, and moral corruption. So, so basically, it's about this guy named Marlowe, his journey into the Congo. Um, Con, oh, sorry. He creates a atmosphere that feels dark or oppressive in the piece. And whenever we did an activity, I focused more on the imagery, like the river and the forest, because it almost feels threatening as it's described in it. Which I feel is what made it very challenging to kind of speak about was because there was all these layers of literature, and it definitely showed how literature can both criticize and participate in colonial attitudes at the same time. Next, we discussed the Chinua. I believe that's how you say it. The Chinua. I don't know how to say his last name, but his criticism. We talked about his criticism on Joseph Conrad and how colonialized people are often dehumanized or silenced because of the imperialist narratives. So it definitely made me think more carefully about the perspective in literature. Obviously, it showed me that literature can reveal important truths about history, but then it can also reflect the biases and the power structures, kind of like what Chinua was saying. Um, Next is war and modernism. So we the tone just completely changed. So the romantic writers were often emphasizing the emotional connection and like imagination, while the modernist writers in this period are more focused on like the trauma and uncertainty. Now, obviously, the romantic writers did as well, but I feel that they did it in a certain way. Oh my gosh, sorry. One of the main reasons was because of the shift was during World War One. Writers like Wilfred Owen, he showed the beautiful realities of war rather than like presenting it as like heroic and honorable. As we learn in our history textbooks, it's obviously we learn about the real truth about it. But at the same time, I feel like it has like this tint of it trying to be heroic and honorable, so it's not explained in a certain way. Like we had an activity about saving Private Ryan. I connected it to the violent D-Day scene, to Owen's poem of Dulce et Decorum Est and Anthem for Doomed Youth. So both the film and the poems emphasize the fear and the suffering and the death rather than the glorifying the combat. Like a lot of in a lot of our textbooks that we learn that we look at in history, yes, it talks about the death rate that we have, like, oh, like all these people, they did this and this and this and they died for us and stuff like that, which they did. But it also talks about everything that they had to go through, like not just us but like the other people on the other side. And I feel like it can show how the people now, we tend to think a lot more happy or successful about it rather than feeling emotionally drained and strained towards it. But it really just depends on whichever way that you look at it. Um, Next would definitely be the absurdism and waiting for Godot. Godot, I don't know how to say that. Sorry. The play mainly focuses on the repetition and uncertainty for meaning. So, Vladimir and Estragon basically are constantly waiting for Godot, but he never arrives. So, the play seems honestly really weird, low-key weird to me, and because like I don't, it's just they're just searching for this thing that is obviously not going to come. But then over time, as we kept reading, I kept realizing that the confusion is precisely what you are meant to. This is what's meant to happen when you're reading this. It shows the uncertainty in the feeling of searching for something when there's not a straight up and clear answer. That's why I was really confused whenever I was reading it, and I ended up using it in my activity. I analyzed Pozo and Lucky through Marxism and power dynamics. So Pozo completely controls Lucky. Um, and depend while Lucky depends on Pozo for survival, so they kind of like feed off of each other. But I connected this to another kind of influencer and cultural take, because modern social media always creates all of these relationships and dependencies and for like validation and approval. Like if we were to use them, then basically we would be Pozo in this. We would be Pozo because we can like if you, or it can be the other way around. Like if you're saying this, how we can control the influencers because we can control them by like not watching them, for example, we would be more like Pozo because we are controlling Lucky, which is the influencers, or it could be the other way around. It tends to be a lot of way around where we tend to be Lucky. We tend to depend on the influencers for like entertainment, while the influencers are like Pozo, where they can control our thinking. They can just control us and increasingly like just have our minds kind of like controlled in a way, basically. And one of the final things I will speak on is the final research paper. So I focused on my main argument being people create routines and companionships and false hope, and in order to survive uncertainty and meaninglessness. So the major themes I touched on was like, of course, repetition, power and control, and mainly the post-war World War II anxiety. So I talked about how waiting can sometimes be a coping mechanism because it can because the silence can kind of force us into confronting emptiness. Kind of like what I said with Vladimir and Escaron earlier, where how they can depend on each other emotionally, and especially with Pozo and Lucky because they depend on each other, or Lucky depends on Pozo, while Pozo is trying to control Lucky, and that can reflect on the systems of power. Um, but overall, this course completely changed the way I think about literature. Before taking this class, I mainly viewed literature as something to analyze for themes or plot, because that's all I was really taught in high school. But now I understand it is a reflection of our behavior in society and just human behavior in general. Um, I know that there are many issues from older literature that still exist today, but in different forms. Like we discuss identity and loneliness and power and general expectations, like Wollstonecraft with when it comes to women and how we see ourselves. It's still active today, just not as bad. Um, and then also with like what we just talked about with Lucky and Pozo, it's how it is with social media. I feel that it's good to have the context, especially the historical context, when understanding this literature, because it can help us like change how we understand the text. And then but it raises one thing about literature is it gives you more questions than answers. Like a lot of the texts definitely left us with way more questions unsaid and unanswered than they did answered. Um, but one thing that definitely helped me with that was the importance of the active engagement and revision. The portfolio system that Dr. Thurley gave us, though at times seemed very like repetitive or it seemed kind of like just kind of tedious, it definitely improved my writing and it helped me in with my stronger connections and ideas. And like I said, I definitely didn't enjoy doing it, but overall, I feel like this course definitely helped me understand my understanding of British literature. Um, and even though these texts were written thousands, not thousands, but hundreds of years ago, a very long time ago, they definitely helped me learn more stuff than I didn't expect it. So thank you for listening, and that was my final presentation on the portfolio and the active notes for Vito. Thank you.